Inflation has slipped out of the headlines compared to 2022, when it dominated the national conversation. Back then, Britain faced the worst price surge in 4 decades. In October 2022, inflation peaked at 11.1%, the highest level in 41 years, a rate not seen since 1981. Since that dramatic peak, inflation has steadily fallen, reaching its lowest point in September 2024. But today, inflation is on the move again, and families across the country are asking a familiar question. Why is everything still getting more expensive? There is a widespread misconception when people hear inflation has fallen. If inflation drops from 11.1% to 3.8%, many assume that prices are coming down. This is not the case. A fall in the inflation rate does not mean costs are reducing. It means they're still rising, just at a slower pace. Prices today remain far higher than they were 3 years ago, and the latest data shows that households are still feeling the squeeze. UK inflation held steady in August, official figures show, maintaining pressure on households as the Bank of England prepares to keep borrowing costs at elevated levels. Figures from the Office for National Statistics, ONS, show the annual rate of inflation as measured by the Consumer Price Index remained at 3.8% last month, the same level as July. The main culprit in this round of price increases is food. Food and non-alcoholic drinks prices were 5.1% higher in August than a year earlier, after a 4.9% rise in July. This marks the 5th consecutive monthly rise in food inflation, and it is hitting households where it hurts most, the weekly shop. Food price inflation climbed for a 5th consecutive month, up from 4.9% in July to 5.1% in August, with small increases in a range of vegetables, cheese, and fish items. The price of chocolate rose by 15.4%, while the cost of beef, butter, and coffee also increased sharply. The Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, is facing intense scrutiny over Labour's economic management amid widespread speculation about tax increases in her autumn budget, which is expected on the 26th of November. Many firms have said they would raise prices after an increase in their social security contributions in Reeves's first budget last October. She's expected to raise taxes again when she delivers her next budget on November 26. Fuel has also played a role. Petrol and diesel costs increased over the summer, offsetting price falls in other areas such as airfares. As the ONS explained, the rise in food prices, which the Bank of England sees as key for shaping public inflation expectations, was the sharpest since January last year and offset a drop in airline fares. Not all categories are heating up at the same rate. If you strip out volatile elements like food and energy, core inflation actually fell slightly from 3.8% to 3.6%. Service inflation also slowed down from 5% to 4.7%. But these small changes are overshadowed by the relentless climb in food costs, which carry much greater weight in household budgets. As Paul Dales of Capital Economics warned, the situation remains troubling. And Monica George Mikhail of NIESR added bluntly, the figures confirm inflation remains entrenched. One of the most concerning aspects of the current situation is how Britain compares internationally. Inflation here in the UK is not only high, it is the highest among advanced economies. Reuters reported British inflation is higher than in the United States, where it increased to 2.9% in August, and in the Eurozone, where it rose to 2.1%, just above the European Central Bank's 2% target. In other words, while other nations are moving closer to price stability, Britain is stuck at nearly double the Bank of England's goal. The bank itself has forecast inflation will reach 4% in September and stay above target until spring 2027. That is a daunting prospect, at least another year and a half before prices start moving in line with international peers. This raises the question, why is Britain such an outlier? Much of the answer lies in government policy choices. Businesses repeatedly warn that the tax burden placed on them, especially after Labour's employer national insurance hike, is feeding inflation directly. When the cost of employing people rises, companies raise prices. When regulatory and border costs climb, those increases land on supermarket shelves. In short, inflation here is not just global, it is partly self-inflicted. The political dimension cannot be ignored. Some argue that this is not just global forces at play, but also a problem of domestic policy. The Telegraph's commentary stated, "Working Britons are paying the price for Reeves's economic chaos." Its analysis laid blame on the Chancellor's tax decisions, particularly the increase in employer national insurance contributions, which retailers claim are feeding directly into higher supermarket prices. Giles Hurley, Aldi's UK chief, pleaded with the Chancellor to think very, very carefully about raising business taxes further in the autumn, as he fears they could find their way into the food sector. Karen Betts of the Food and Drink Federation went further, warning that this year's increases to employer national insurance contributions, the new packaging tax, business rates rises, and the cost of border checks, including to Northern Ireland, are heaping costs on our sector. Rachel Reeves herself acknowledged the difficulty. "I know families are finding it tough, and that for many the economy feels stuck. That's why I'm determined to bring costs down and support people who are facing higher bills." Yet markets and analysts are sceptical, with many predicting Reeves will need to raise £20 to £50 billion in taxes in her 26th of November budget. If those taxes fall again on businesses and consumers, it could compound the very problem she says she wants to solve. Many economists are predicting that the Bank of England will keep interest rates at their current level in order to battle inflation. Yet, the type of inflation Britain faces today is not mainly the result of households spending too much. Instead, it is being driven by supply-side and cost pressures, from higher food prices, elevated energy costs, and the tax burden on businesses. This makes the bank's main tool of raising or holding interest rates a blunt instrument. That's why some economists argue that keeping interest rates high may do little to tackle this kind of inflation. Higher borrowing costs reduce demand for mortgages and credit, but they don't make food, fuel, or employer national insurance contributions cheaper. In fact, the interest rate squeeze risks being counterproductive. It raises mortgage bills for households and financing costs for businesses, while leaving the underlying drivers of inflation, like food prices or taxes, largely untouched. In practice, keeping rates at 4% may simply extend the squeeze on families and firms, while doing little to address the root of the problem. Beyond the numbers, the cost of living crisis is being felt directly in households across the country. Families are squeezed by the rising cost of food, fuel, and mortgages. For many, even small increases in everyday items are deeply felt, because budgets were already stretched thin after years of price rises. Poorer households are hit hardest, as a greater share of their income goes to essentials like groceries and energy. When food inflation pushes the cost of staples like bread, milk, or vegetables higher, it leaves less room for anything else. Energy bills remain elevated too, meaning many are forced to choose between heating, eating, or saving. At the same time, the labour market is weakening. Redundancies are creeping up. Unemployment has reached a 4-year high, and wage growth is slowing. This means pay packets are not keeping up with the rising cost of living, creating a sense that households are falling behind no matter how hard they work. The fear among businesses and households alike is that higher taxes in the coming budget could once again feed back into higher prices, perpetuating the very squeeze they're meant to ease. Britain's inflation problem has changed since 2022. Back then, the story was a global energy shock. Today, it is about entrenched domestic pressures, food, fuel, mortgages, and taxes. Inflation may have fallen from its terrifying 11.1% peak, but at 3.8%, it is still eating into household budgets at a faster rate than in the US or Europe. The bottom line is this: prices are not going down. They're still going up, just not as quickly as before. And with Britain standing as an outlier among advanced economies, the road back to stability looks long and uncertain. This is why the budget coming up on the 26th of November is proving to be one of the most anticipated fiscal events in modern history. With inflation stuck high, households squeezed, and businesses warning of further price rises, Chancellor Rachel Reeves has her work cut out. Every decision, from taxes to spending, will shape not just the economy, but people's daily lives. Will she bring relief or risk deepening the squeeze? All eyes are on her next move. If you found this breakdown helpful, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more updates.